There it is. All of our meeting norms.
Yeah.
So I thought today, as we usually do, if we can all kind of put our name and affiliation in the chat, but also do kind of just a little, since it's a small group, we don't really have to do an icebreaker, but just a little share out. I'm now up on the Northeast and just got here a couple of days ago and enjoying these longer days as we approach the longest day of the year. So I just thought if everybody could kind of quickly share and reflect briefly about what you enjoyed doing kind of with this brighter mornings and longer evenings with sunlight. So for me, it's kind of taking a walk after dinner. And I'll introduce myself too, but Brooke Freeland with the Couch Family Foundation. And just, it's so nice to be kind of up in cool New England nights and be able to get outside after dinner time. So with that, I will pass it to Andrea.
I'm Andrea Dunhauer. I am briefly still the interim project manager for the EC initiative with Vital Communities. And I think what we're both enjoying and having a hard time with is we have a lot of birds in our yard at our new house, and they're wonderful, but they get started really early, like way earlier than we would like. So we are enjoying that, but it can be difficult. So I will pass it to Deli.
Sorry, I'm in the middle of typing. I am Deli Champagne, and I am with Save the Children Action Network. Really excited to be a part of this group and learn what you're doing. I've only been in the job for about 3 months, so really hoping to be supportive of the work that you're doing and participate. And then I was typing, so I forgot the question. It is something about
just kind of reflecting on what you do, what you're enjoying, or maybe not so much enjoying about these bright early mornings and longer daylight hours.
Oh, definitely helping with my mental health for sure. I'm a person that remotely works from home. So whenever I can get out and go for a walk, like you said, Brooke, definitely helps with my mental health. So thanks for having me. I will pick Liz.
Or Lisa, yeah.
Sorry, Lisa. Yeah,
that's fine. Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm the Upper Valley Waypoint Family Resource Manager, and I mean, I like winter. I like getting my pajamas on at 4 and reading, but I do like the extended daylight, and I love hiking, so I can go hiking after work, and yeah, yard work till 9 o'clock is great. And that's about all I have. And Drake.
Hi folks, good morning. Sorry, I'm actually out in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont today, which is a place I love to go in the summer, but the internet access is not great out here. So I'm gonna stay off video. But my name's Drake. I'm the Senior Policy Manager at Let's Grow Kids. Newer to this group, but really excited to be a part of this and learn about everything that you all are working on. So I will call on Charlotte next.
I'm Charlotte Rutledge. I am a parent, and I put in the chat, I am a former employee of King Arthur Baking Company, and now trying the self-employed route, seeing if that better balances the family lifestyle. But I think I just enjoy getting out early in the morning. I'm a morning runner, and just not having to put on the headlamp and multiple layers is always a treat. Who hasn't gone yet? Mariah, have you gone?
Nope, thank you. Hi everyone, Mariah Davis from Mascoma Bank. I manage our philanthropy programs here. And I would say, so I have a wraparound porch on my house. So we have front porch furniture and stuff. So I think we took that out in April, but of course it's a little cold still at night. So I'm enjoying actually being out there now after dinner and reading, and I love to read. So I'll just sit out there. So that's enjoyable for me. I will pass this to Michael.
Good morning, Michael Bennett with the Couch Family Foundation. And I think for me, being able to resume my evening bike rides is extremely pleasurable and very needed for mental health. So, Amy, how about you?
Good morning, Amy Brooks, Early Care and Education Association. And I'm definitely a daylight person, not a nighttime person. And I don't know, Rachel, have you gone?
Sorry, I'm kind of multitasking right now. Do you have them? All right, sorry. So I am Rachel Williams with the Family Place. It's a busy morning over here right now. And I do the Childcare Financial Assistance and Referral Program. And with the weather, I'm just enjoying my son getting to go back outside after we get done with dinner and not just sitting around the TV.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. I think that's everyone. Great. Well, good. So hopefully we can make some time to get outside today. Just a couple housekeeping items before we jump in. Just wanted to kind of reiterate that with their chat, please continue to put resources and information in the chat. That will all be collected in our meeting minutes. So it's really kind of a nice additive way to add to the conversation. So no kind of links, thoughts that go in there are incorporated into our minutes and shared out. And Vital Communities is hiring for part-time and full-time positions to help kind of carry this work forward. Andrea's transitioning out, and so we need to fill her big shoes, and then as well as a full-time staff position to help kind of carry this work within Vital Communities. And I don't know, Andrea, if you have the links to the job descriptions handy, but we'll add those to the chat. But if you could just share those job descriptions out with your networks just to get word out as much as possible, we'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, I want to clarify that they're both full-time.
Oh,
Yeah.
Even better.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, both full-time, but yeah, actively looking to kind of get those positions filled. Then what else do I have on? I'm just going through my notes. And then, I guess I'll kind of turn it over. I have some kind of quick updates relative to advocacy, but also want to give everyone here a chance to share if they have updates as well. But I can kind of start, and as you can kind of fill in some of my gaps in knowledge, that would be helpful. But I know because I know there was some confusion or questions that there was supposed to be an early child ECE rally on June 4th at the Capitol in New Hampshire, which was canceled, and there was some concern and confusion over why it was canceled. And from our understanding, it was because there was another rally, a gun reform rally, also kind of quickly scheduled for that same day, and there's concern about potential counter protests showing up at the Capitol. And so for everyone's kind of safety, they postponed the ECE workforce rally. And I don't know if Delia or Amy, if you have an update about potentially rescheduling that, or what might be happening down the road.
Amy, you want me to go? Okay, this is Deli. So yeah, we had everything ready to go. Oh my God, we put so much time and effort and energy into it. And I was really disappointed that it came to that. I think it was a tough decision, but it was just in case. And with, Uvalde on our minds, we realized that we had to cancel that. So it's, we're still meeting, the group is still meeting regularly, and we're hoping to make it even bigger and better in September.
Yeah, well, we'll keep us posted. And that kind of aligns with you have film screenings. You're going to do a film screening too. So there might be good alignment with that event if that's still on the calendar.
film screening is definitely on the calendar. That's the 28th of September. Yes. Yep. Yeah, I'll keep you posted.
Great, thank you. And then I know that, sorry, we have lots going on in our background today. We had, and Michael, I'm going to kind of lean to you. I know Early Learning New Hampshire does regular advocacy calls, and just kind of thinking about how we can best kind of keep the channels of communication open and keep this group updated, and with all the kind of pockets of advocacy convenings that are happening both in New Hampshire and Vermont. So kind of leaning to you and others to help kind of close the loop on those conversations and report back to this group and Delhi too, because I'm sure you're on those calls as well. And then kind of second and teeing up following that, kind of on the Vermont side, kind of looking to Drake and others within Let's Grow Kids to help bring back any reports to this group, and kind of trying to start off those meetings with those updates. And hi, Tammy, it's always great to have you. And your background noise, we love it. So Michael, if you don't mind kind of starting and just kind of giving us an overview of some of the conversations that are going on with Early Learning New Hampshire, that'd be great.
Yeah, so since our last advocacy meeting, the early childhood advocates in New Hampshire have started this process of setting their priorities for the upcoming year. And Early Learning New Hampshire, which hosts a childcare advocacy call every Wednesday morning, I think it's 9:30, it usually starts. And I think it's fairly open. If others want to join, please do. But we learned a couple things. One is, and this just specific to this group, Sean Mulholland will be presenting to that group either next week or in the coming weeks about his property tax exemption legislation, to kind of bring that to the broader early childhood advocates in New Hampshire. So, you know, stay tuned on that to see what questions they have coming up. But in terms of the priorities moving forward, sort of some of the bigger takeaways is this. One is the focus on the state budget in New Hampshire. So this is going to be a budget year coming up to set the biannual budget. And during the last budget cycle, childcare actually lost about $16 million over 2 years. So the state cut that funding from the state subsidy system, primarily because that state subsidy system, it just historically does not spend down the money that it has. So it creates this perception that if you're not spending the money, then you don't need the money. However, you know, I think those of us who work in the field, and there are others on this call who can probably speak to this more directly than I can, you know, because of the ways in which that subsidy system works, it's really hard for families to access. You know, there's a real high family copay involved. You know, those subsidy payments only pay about 60% of the cost of market rate childcare, even though the federal guidelines call to pay at least 75%. And then there's all these other issues about that market rate not really reflecting the cost of quality. These are all things I think many of us know. But there are real reasons for why this money is not being drawn down. So the advocates are kind of focused on that issue, getting that funding returned, and then focusing on the subsidy system and the rules that sort of, you know, manage that system, and how do we expand family eligibility? How do we change those rates so that they more accurately reflect the cost of quality? How do we reduce family copays? All these things. How do we shift from, you know, an attendance-based sort of model for paying those subsidies to an enrollment-based model to create more consistent funding for providers? These are all things that advocates are going to be pushing for in the coming year. So stay tuned on that. Workforce recruitment and retention is high on the list. And while there are no kind of specific pieces of legislation around that. I think there's a broad range of issues around bonus pay, benefits, behavioral health supports, supports for credentialing and degree attainment. So, stay tuned on that. And Amy was on that call, and perhaps she can speak a little more to that if she has any additional information. There are some other things that were discussed during the last meeting. One is paying more attention to the federal legislation, because I think there is this understanding that we're not going to get to where we want to go without significant federal funding. So how do we begin to influence the federal delegation in New Hampshire to be strong advocates for that federal legislation? And then utilization of the remaining ARPA discretionary funds. There's about 30 million that still exists that has been earmarked for childcare. So how can state advocates help influence how the state invests that funding? And then I'll just say, and this is more of an observation than anything coming out of that group, there is a focus on specific legislation and not a clear vision for where advocates want to see the state move, right? So I think there was also some conversation that we need to begin to think about how we change the narrative in New Hampshire and how we begin to elevate childcare as a public good, and a longer term advocacy vision that builds public will to support bigger investments in childcare moving forward. And while we need to focus on immediate needs, we can't lose sight of this sort of longer term advocacy goals. So nobody in the state really owns that work right now. So I think there was a recognition that we need to begin to move to build that capacity and to build that infrastructure in the state to be able to set that long-term vision. So, stay tuned. Hopefully more will happen along those lines as well. So.
Great. I have a question, but Deli, go. You have your hand raised. Go, I'll let you jump in.
Thank you for all of that, Michael. I wanted to just add to that, and I agree with Michael that there really hasn't been a leader taking on this charge. So we are partnering at SCAN with New Futures, and we have a grant from New Hampshire Charitable Foundation to hire a consultant that we are meeting with on Wednesday, who is going to help us create a plan to strategize. And we're going to work our butts off this summer to hopefully, our goal is to create a big omnibus bill for the next session. So we have begun the conversations deciding who's going to be in that group to work toward this omnibus bill. One of the things that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be visiting childcare centers and meeting with providers, teachers, parents, and I'm going to collect stories. We know that's what changes the hearts and minds of legislators. So while in the past we've signed petitions or made phone calls, it really, my company has done a lot of research, and it really is the personal story with lived experience that changes minds. So that's my project over the summer, is collecting stories from people who are willing to share their frustrations or their struggles or their successes, even what's working for them in terms of childcare. So I just wanted to let you know that that's on our horizon at SCAN.
Great. And so the omnibus bill, I mean, that's exciting, and to kind of capitalize on the current momentum. Will it be just early childhood education focused, or broader, or to be determined?
So that will be determined. And, we have Senator Whitley, who's very on board with this. That's kind of why we've pulled in the consultant, really to help us. Do we need to have a more narrow focus, or do we need to have a broad? What's the best strategy for success? So we will hopefully have some answers after our meeting on Wednesday, or at least moving in the right direction. So if I can keep you all updated on that work over the summer.
Great. And Michael, yeah, and how we can lead in, and if the consultant wants to connect with this group too. I mean, we have providers and we have kind of the unlikely allies as well on this conversation. So good, different frame of references and perspectives.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Deli, and that's super exciting news. But I would just put in a plug that, you know, early education and care needs to be centered in these conversations. And if they're not, then we need to find some other pathways in which to do that, right? And so that's just one point I would make. The other point I would make is it's critical that this work is representational of the different perspectives, right? And so provider perspectives, family perspectives, we need to ensure that there is some equity in representation in the work that is happening in any kind of broad-based kind of bill development. So just, and I'm sure you guys are thinking about that, but I just want to just kind of put that plug out there.
No, I love that, Michael. Thank you. Those are great things to keep in mind. Absolutely.
Amy, go ahead.
No, just Deli, I just wanted to make sure you knew that we're doing a storytelling project right now in Upper Valley for Upper Valley, New Hampshire providers. So you'll have some of that. Lucy Resio from NEYC is doing it, or formerly from NEYC Advocacy. You can talk to Christina about it. Anyway, it's underway, almost complete.
Can we, all right, let's talk offline so I can get more information about this. Oh my God, that is so exciting.
We're a little bit ahead. So that was one thing. And then I just wanted to mention that yesterday I had a meeting with Homegrown for this Homegrown grant to build family childcare in Upper Valley. And Sean Mulholland like blew them out of the water. I know I was preaching to the choir, but I was just, I nearly, like, I was tearing up as he was talking, and I'm like, this guy is some, I don't know. So, and they, you know, they're all over that Homegrown. It was exactly what they wanted to hear, but I was just like, we need to like turn them around and face the other way and talk to the people who don't know about this. And then I was at Rotary Club yesterday too, they had given us a grant, and talking to, you know, that kind of group that we want to hear about this, and explaining to them why, you know, why we're stuck because that, you know, we need to get to break even before we can use any of these funds to move ahead. We're not at break even. We need staff. These are the minimum qualifications. They asked a ton of questions about minimum qualifications, about pay, and they were genuinely concerned. They were asking really, really, really great questions. And I started thinking about, you know, when you talk about grassroots, like if you had these people that really get it, like Sean and other municipalities, get Julia, you have these people in this kind of advocacy role, what would that look like? Because they're not your typical players.
Explain the Homegrown grant a little bit to this group. Just give a little context for everyone.
Yeah, so it's like, Brooke, you know what about. Okay, so Homegrown is a grant that supports building family childcare networks. And the Upper Valley has a family childcare network. They have a starting points group in Vermont that is not necessarily facilitated or funded very heavily. And we got, the ECEA got a PDG grant, a preschool development grant, back in 2020, when we focused on building capacity and quality in family childcare, specifically around infant toddler care. So we already have our hands in this, and we already have 31 people sort of regularly engaging that network. And this Homegrown grant will help us continue and build that work. So major pieces are to support the providers now to keep them from closing, to support any providers now to expand. We've actually found some people started this 20 years ago when their kids were little and they're on the verge of closing or expanding. And with our support, 3 of them are trying to expand, supporting them with like payroll, understanding payroll supports and things like that. And then the other piece is we monitor the Facebook pages in the Upper Valley around childcare, and we see a lot of people saying, I'm taking kiddos in my house, I have an opening for 1 or 2. We want to get those people regulated or licensed. We want them to go to capacity and improve quality. So those were kind of our 3 main pieces, and we were selected to do it. We had a meeting with them yesterday, Brooke, and Sean and I asked a lot of questions about by state, the kind of interstate piece, and they were very flexible about where their funds go. So we were encouraged that we could build what needs to be built in Upper Valley.
That's exciting. And I think, there's opportunities for this vital communities, kind of when businesses are asked, how can they engage, if there's mentoring or business supports that these providers need as they're trying to kind of get online. And we've kind of seen models of that where that's been a way to engage business in home-based childcare. So just something to think about. And also kind of as it ramps up and kind of tying it back to what Michael was saying about outlining an advocacy agenda, thinking about kind of legislative avenues, but also regulatory avenues, and getting those providers licensed or getting families kind of linked with subsidies. What are the regulatory hurdles that are preventing that? And so what are channels that we can kind of weigh in or elevate that don't necessarily require legislation or the budget, but could actually help alleviate some hurdles for providers and for families? So kind of both on the Vermont and the New Hampshire side, just to kind of be thinking about that and to bring those back to this group as well.
So Brooke, for some reason, my raised hand keeps disappearing. I'm probably user error, but
At this point, just anyone can jump in,
Right.
We don't have to be polite.
A couple of things. So Amy, if this is your first time experiencing Sean Mulholland, he's a force of nature. And when he commits to doing something, he takes no prisoners. So his council had the foresight to give him all their ARPA money and basically say, this is a pot of money, go make things happen. So he's making things happen. And he also realizes he's got his own staff recruitment challenges because of a lack of childcare. So make the most of it while he's there, because he's a force of nature. Secondly, and Amy, you may have heard about this, and I was just on a phone call and talking with Ann at GRDC, Grafton Regional Development Corporation, and Ann Duncan Cooley, who's the executive director, and she has navigator money and has connected with Sean because they want to put money into childcare. So just FYI, Ann and I and a group of folks from the region have a business transformation informal conversation twice a month on early Friday mornings. And so we were percolating ideas, and she mentioned, I said I needed to head to this call, which is why I was late. Sorry, Brooke, but she mentioned, make sure folks know I've talked to Sean. We've got a navigator hired, and we want to pump money into childcare. So they're waiting to pounce, FYI.
That's exciting. Thanks, Julia. And I kind of put in the chat, Sean is the city administrator for Lebanon and also sits on the steering committee of this ECE work within Vital Communities and leads the workforce, the not recruitment retention, but the facilities
and program models.
group.
I know. it makes sense as a bucket, but it's a little bit of a mouthful. I wanted to throw into this conversation that last Friday I was contacted by 2 members of Bernie Sanders' outreach staff, and they said, "Hey, we found you in the ether somehow," that they didn't say explicitly, "and we want to talk to you about this initiative." So I and the development director from Vital Communities met with them, only because Sarah Jackson happens to be on vacation this week, and my direct supervisor, Rob Schultz, was dealing with Leadership Upper Valley graduation the day that they could come. So we met with them, and we spent probably an hour and 45 minutes chatting with them about this issue, about what we're doing, about, they asked about the structure of the initiative. So I explained that to them, who the players are, how Vital Communities is going about this, really, emphasizing that has to be a bi-state solution in this region. And one of the biggest things I am hearing in this conversation, and that I was talking to them about, was how crucial it is to be aware of and sensitive to the need to have intersectional conversations about this, so that everyone sees themselves in this work, right? So like Michael talking about having all of the voices be in there, and Deli, and Amy, referencing the storytelling. I think that, again, like that is what changes people's minds about what it means, why we need childcare, why it's important, what role it has in our society, why it's something to invest in, and make sure that it's, that $16 million is like heartbreaking to me, that like people just couldn't get to it. Like that's a crime. Yeah, I just wanted to, and they were like, so they were very open to, if there's events or something that the initiative is hosting, that it might be appropriate for them to come to, so if there's certain work group meetings that, it would be great to have them present at. They really want to, it's very important to Bernie's office that they are hearing what's happening for people on the ground, and not just going on the data. And also that they're available to, if there's a specific thing that would be a great project and we just need some funding for it, that's also a possibility. They have access to and knowledge of all kinds of funds. I know one of the outreach folks mentioned that FEMA might be offering money in connection with ECE because of the state of emergency due to COVID. So, and I hadn't heard about that. And so I haven't looked that up yet, but anyway, it was just, I wanted to make sure that this group was aware that I had spoken with them, that they're in the mix, they're aware, and they're really excited about the way that we're doing this, that it really is a, that Vital Communities has shown up as a convener, and that's it, that the ownership and the onus is on the communities of the Upper Valley to make those solutions happen in a sustainable way. So.
That's exciting that some intern found us in their research project, but no, that's great. And
I know they went and spoke with Rachel too. They went to the family place right before they came to Vital Communities. So.
No, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I was gonna say, one of them, James, his wife had been in the early education field previously in the education field, and he just seemed like he could be a real champion of the issue to connect with.
The other strength of that is that the other part of his background besides education is labor. Mm-hmm. So when I said the workforce behind the workforce, he was like light bulbs went off. So there's a depth of knowledge there that's like that's a good ally.
And is he in Vermont or is he in DC?
He's in Vermont.
Okay.
Yeah, but he connected me with his DC counterpart. So
I'd say conversely too, if there's opportunities for us to kind of advocate or be supportive of work that's happening at the federal level, for them to loop that information back to us as well. That's exciting. And actually kind of ties to one other update that I had, that's something we're planning for kind of 2 weeks out, or hopefully our next advocacy convening is to kind of do a little advocacy 101 training for this group and inviting members from the other work groups to attend as well, just as we kind of begin to get into the weeds and legislative sessions and budgetary sessions and kind of what can we do as individuals versus what can we do as part of the vital communities, and what's the difference between grassroots advocacy and direct advocacy. And so just to kind of give us an overview of how we can lean in and how we should not lean in as this coalition versus as individuals. So putting that out there. If you have kind of questions specific to that, feel free to pass those along to Sara or myself ahead of time. But Matt Levin from Vermont has offered to kind of lead us in that training in 2 weeks. Yeah. And also it kind of ties in, I know, with back to Sean, who's driving his train and legislation around property tax exemption. That's very specific legislation. And so understanding, kind of using that as a example, what our role could be in supporting that, and to what's kind of crossing the line into lobbying versus just advocacy.
Brooke, this is Deli. Can I throw something out there? All right. So in 2019, Becky Whitley and I worked for the Children's Behavioral Health Collaborative, and we were able to get Senate Bill 14 signed into law, which is mobile crisis statewide for all children. So I don't know if you guys know my story, but my son's first episode psychosis happened in middle school, and he tried to take his life. And so they called the police. The police came and handcuffed him in front of 1,100 students and dragged him out and put him in the back of a police car. And the elementary school across the street, his brother witnessed the whole thing, and his brother's friend said, "Oh, Jack, isn't that your brother Peter being put into a police car? Here my son was having a medical emergency and he was treated like a criminal." So that's what spurred me into advocacy. And I didn't want that to happen to any other families. So we decided mobile crisis needed to happen. The clinician needed to come to the school and not a police officer. So we gathered stories. I found as many families as I could that had experienced that same trauma, and we put them together in a book. We made a storybook, and that storybook got us so much attention and traction. We gave it to all 424 legislators, and it was just something that we printed off of our computer, and I stapled them together, but it was the power of the story. And I found diverse ages and diverse stories. And most people shared their picture. Some did not want to. But we handed that, we emailed it to all 424, and then we got a bunch of volunteers that stood at the State House and handed them out as they walked in. So they got 2 copies. It's such an easy tool. So I'm hoping that when you if you do an Advocacy 101 training, we can talk about that tool and hopefully create it and implement it. I really saw it work. And I can't express enough the power of the story, the personal story. And I don't think we do that enough in New Hampshire. And it's frustrating me a little bit. So I'm trying to push it out there. So thank you.
No, I love that. And thank you for sharing your personal story. I agree. Putting a face and humanizing an issue makes all the difference, especially in these past 2 years where we've all been remote. It's very easy to forget that, these are real lives that are being impacted by these decisions. Thanks for highlighting that. Kind of want to pass it out to the group for other updates. I know, Drake, we'd love kind of hearing about what's cooking on the Vermont side. It's never a dull moment.
Sure. I know. And now that my internet's working, I realize that you can't even really see my face if I'm on video because the light is not my favor. So I'm going to stay off. But a lot of what Michael mentioned earlier is definitely applicable in Vermont. So our legislative session ended last month, and we've basically been waiting for the governor to sign all the different bills that have investments in childcare. And yesterday, I think at this point, all of the bills we've been tracking have been signed, including the budget. So That's great. It means that we can start focusing on the implementation of different things that happened this year. And as a quick recap, the Vermont legislature this year passed an increase in the childcare financial assistance program. And that's on top of an increase that was passed last year that still hasn't gone into effect. So we're really eager to see those changes go into effect. They've been slowed down by longer than anticipated IT updates, which I think is probably not a new story for any of these types of investments, but we're hopeful that those increases will go into effect next month and hopefully have a pretty big impact on affordability for Vermont families. So we've been tracking that really closely. And then the legislature also passed some increases in funding for capacity development. There was a $7 million one-time investment in retention bonuses for folks working in regulated programs. And then there were a couple of other workforce-related investments, including, I believe it was $100,000 for pre-apprenticeships for high school students that are interested in getting into the field. So that's really exciting. And then there's also, last year, the legislature passed a financing study that wasn't funded, that got funded in the budget this year. So our joint fiscal office has contracted with a consultant to study what would it look like if we paid the true cost of care in Vermont, and then what are potential revenue sources to fund a transformed childcare system. So we're right now, in addition to just now wanting to shift to pay really close attention to make sure that, in particular, that $7 million in retention bonuses goes out to the field as soon as possible. We're also starting to look at what is in store for 2023. We have a new legislative biennium next year, so and a lot to do around childcare transformation. So we're anticipating having some fairly significant legislation next year to really achieve true affordability in our childcare system, a well-compensated and well-resourced workforce, paying based on enrollment rather than attendance. That's also super important on our side of the border. And then right now, so a lot of that work's going on. We're working with a ton of our partners and I would say most of our staff to figure out what has happened and then what needs to happen next year so we can start to think about legislation. And we're also this year, we're still in the planning stages, but we're working on convening a racial equity advisory group, getting folks from the BIPOC community and other communities. We're also working with folks from the special needs community to make sure that the legislation and policy that we're advocating for is truly reflective of the needs of different communities. So we're working, I'm happy to share with this group. I think it's something that we haven't always done to the extent that we would like to, but we're working with to see how we can get folks together to really talk about how different policies are impacting them and how we can, shift and adjust and add different components to really make a difference for all Vermonters. So we're really excited about that work. And then now our filing deadline for the election this year passed at the end of May. So we're also working on communication out to candidates for public office. So we have a candidate childcare brief that we're sending out to all candidates who filed to run. There's a lot of turnover in the Vermont legislature this year, where I think around 1/3 of our Senate is retiring and a lot of House members too. So we want to make sure that everyone who's running for office in Vermont sees how important childcare is to Vermonters, not just from us, but from their potential constituents and from voters. So we're really excited to dig into that work as well. And I think that's everything. I'm going to stop talking, but if folks have any questions, I'm happy to hear. It's great to hear so many of these conversations, in whether it's in Vermont or New Hampshire, are really focused on the things that are going to make a difference in our childcare system. And it's always a pleasure to hear the conversation in this group.
Drake, could I get a look at that childcare brief? Oh my God, that sounds amazing. I have been meeting with folks that are filing to run for office in New Hampshire and just talking about early childhood ed and care, and would love to have a document like that to guide me or possibly hand to them. I'd love to copy if you don't mind.
Oh my gosh, that's a huge compliment, and we're happy to have anyone copy our stuff. Yeah, I believe it's going out today. I'll check with our comms folks, and I think we'll also have it posted on our website. So I will follow up with this group. Happy to share.
Thank you. Ooh,
Thanks, Drake. I mean, that's significant. I mean, what would you say was the overall increased investment in ECE in the state budget this year for Vermont?
Oh, I knew this the other day. It's less than 20 million, but
I
it's
mean,
more than 10. A lot of the investment this year is one-time dollars. A lot of it was ARPA funding, but we had about 4.9 million in base funding increases for CCFAP, which was really exciting. But it was a tough legislative session, I would say. There were so many needs in Vermont, I'm sure in New Hampshire as well. And I think a lot of advocates thought that federal funding was going to go further than it ended up going, even though it was incredible. So we're really looking forward to digging in next year too, to really get those one-time investments are so important, but we know, retention bonuses aren't going to solve our workforce crisis in early childhood education. We really need to address compensation. So we're really looking forward to that conversation next year.
Drake, I wanted to know if Let's Grow Kids is connected with the WAVE group in Vermont that's convened by Will Eberly. So it's working to advance Vermont equity.
Ooh, I am not sure, but I'm going to write that down and check with other folks because that sounds familiar to me.
Yeah. I haven't been able to attend. He hosts a weekly meeting, and it's a statewide coalition of equity focused folks from, I mean, we had the state librarian there, for a while. It's a very wide range of folks. Vermont After School is there. Vermont Works for Women is there. So anyway, but I just, am always mindful of how the word equity has really risen to the surface in the past couple of years. And not wanting to reinvent anything and make sure that efforts are all connected. So,
yeah, thank you very much, Andrea. I will check because if we're not, we probably should be connected to that group.
And Drake, always let us know how this work group can help support your efforts as well. And I mean, I think I remember there was a gap within the Vermont legislature. There weren't really any early childhood advocates in the Upper Valley region of Vermont. And I don't know what the turnover is like, but if there's opportunities for us to weigh in these candidate forums and kind of elevate the ECE voice so that any new legislative members kind of recognize that this is something we'll be paying attention to coming up to election season.
Yeah, Brooke, that's a great point. And aside from just, wanting to be connected with you all in general, I think knowing what's happening in the Upper Valley when it comes to, there's just so much going on this election season. So knowing where those key moments are to connect with candidates in your region would be extremely helpful. If there are forums or just really high impact community events that are going on, we'd love to be incorporating those into our candidate engagement and voter engagement strategy. That would be extremely helpful.
Great. I'm also kind of plugging the listserv, the ECE Federal Communities listserv too, as a way to get information out to this group and a broader group as well. Any other updates or share outs that people want to include? Amy, I might put you on the spot just if there's anything from your retention recruitment work group. It's worth kind of keeping us in the loop on.
Yeah, we're just trying to get caught up with what we've asked everybody to do in a very busy time of year. And then still working on some other ideas to get started, making some connections, might have something to update at the next meeting. I did want to ask does anybody here know Joy Goodman from Lebanon High? She was at the Rotary Club meeting and said that she had students, high school students in New Hampshire, obviously, that were interested. It made me think when Drake was talking, interested in early childhood. and kind of very informal process working with and outreach with a couple of very specific centers. And it made me think that even more that we needed sort of a grounding place to connect with area high schools that needed to connect with anybody. And I didn't know which, it's something that the ECEA has been trying to do, is connect to the guidance counselors at the high schools and what's left of the tech centers. But I didn't know if for Upper Valley, this is an Upper Valley focus group, how we can kind of formalize in our plan, making sure that we do outreach and we connect to every principal and every guidance counselor, and they're not all answering in us and giving us like that kind of connection. So I was turning to the advocacy group to see if there was anyone that, we could send Sean to like the area principals meeting was my first thought. Like we could deploy Sean out to, like, I know that they have superintendent meetings and things like that, but yeah,
Amy, I just looked up Joy. She's an early learning reading and writing specialist in the Lebanon School District.
So I wonder how the guidance counselor must send those students to her.
That's my thinking. I'll see if I can find out a little bit more information for you, but they may also coordinate closely with guidance. So I think you're probably right that there's some students in the high school who are interested in careers in early childhood education, and because that's what Joy does, that may be how she's making that sort of professional connection, but I'll see what I can find out for you.
That would be great. I'm going to be getting back to my contact at Rotary to get her contact. She wanted to connect, but I feel, when I go to meetings, it's like, why didn't you reach out to our guidance counselors? We are, but they're not engaging.
Right.
So that's why I was like, if this group, if we had, if we gave the advocacy group that charge to make those connections, and I think we need to have a plan before we do that. We need to, like, what are we going to be sending them to? How are we going to be making that connection? Who would be on the receiving end? But it's definitely something we've been trying to attend to, because if Lebanon had 4 people, who else are we missing?
Yeah, I just sent you Joy's LinkedIn link. She's on LinkedIn.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just add to that quickly, I think that's a great idea, Amy, but I think building stronger relationships with the public school systems just broadly, it would be important for this initiative. And perhaps when new staff comes on, this is something that they could pay some attention to, because, as we see, longer term, if we are successful in investments in childcare expand and we start to see more school districts adopting preschool and what have you, this is going to be a mixed delivery system. Building those partnerships and collaboration between school leaders that are running preschool programs and community-based providers is super important. And there's so many models of, like, shared professional development, shared agenda setting, data sharing that really strengthens this sort of system of care from 0 to 5. So I think building those relationships just more broadly is something we need to pay more attention to.
Michael, I really appreciate that you're bringing that up. One of the things that blew Sanders staff out of the water is when I said there's no standardized mechanism for communication between the ECE programs and the public school system. None. Sometimes you have been taking care of a child since they were 6 weeks old and they just disappear. And you just absorb this person and have no idea what their story is, what their experience has been. And it's not that it doesn't happen, but it's very, very personnel dependent on both sides. So, and they were like, what? Why is it? I'm like, I know. And I think another piece of this though is that, I mean, they also asked, well, could you, is there a way to sort of like, what's the relationship between the ECE advocacy world and pre-K pre-K in public school settings? And one of the reasons they were bringing that up is because when they spoke with Rachel, one of the things she pointed out was there's a lot of staff have been lost from private ECE programming to school positions. That was pre-existing from COVID. So, and I said, look, with public schools also being in the position that they're in, with being underfunded, under-resourced, et cetera, it can be really challenging when everybody is just trying to survive, to reach across the aisle and say, we need to do this together. We're going to be better together. We're not in competition with each other. We need to work together. So I think in general, that's a need anyway. And again, I'm going to also throw in that families also need to be a part of that, because there is that when everybody is trying to just survive, it can be hard, but that's super important.
So, Andrew, I just want to add one thing to that and echo it, that yes, that whole process of transition is really challenging. The one area where I feel centers and providers do have a good opportunity for communicating the history of a child when they're transitioning to a school program. It really only happens when that child has some type of special need or early intervention services that they've been receiving. And then that only happens if a center director like me says, okay, I want us to be involved in the IEP meetings. I want us to be involved in the transition team meetings. That takes an intentional desire to do that, because it's extra that we take on to make sure that we're really helping this child have the best possible transition into a school program. So that is something I'm trying to build more intentionally in my own program, to have that. But it would be wonderful if we had communication with the public schools that we serve, which are not just the ones in our town, but around it, because not only do kids transition, of course, for kindergarten, but then some kids stay with us maybe till they're 3 or 4, and then they transition to a public pre-K setting. There's no communication when that happens. And trying to figure out how to make that better is really an interesting idea. So thank you for sharing that with people, that is an area where there's a gap. And I wish that there was a way to really focus on how to fix that.
Coos County actually has done a lot of work with this. And that all I can tell you is what not to do, because it hasn't worked. So they brought us together. Ruth, they had we only have 3 licensed centers. They brought us in for up here, but they brought all the licensed centers together. We went to the Mountain View, Grand, all of the public pre-K and kindergarten teachers were there. And then I think we were there like 2 days or 3 days. And then they had some of the administrators and the preschool administrators were there. After days of discussion, at my group, they kind of grouped us by our region. At my group, I had a kindergarten teacher that was like totally engaged, right on top of it. And the other one was turned with their back to us texting. They wanted, making it a clear statement, they wanted nothing to do with us. And, I have more experience in education than she does. And I really felt like she was like, I don't value you. And I want you to know that. So I think there should have been like maybe some level setting done prior to the work that we had to do. And we came out of it with a set of goals that we really felt that children, like, these are the skills that children need to succeed in this trend. This is what we want to see. And none of them were academic. They were all social emotional skills, executive functioning skills. So after the retreat or whatever, we started meeting regularly, and the conversations were still at academics. So like, even though when we did this 3-day kind of They really need to have, attention to detail. They really need to, be able to shift gears and work well with others and to express themselves or whatever. We'd get to the meeting and they'd be like, how come you're not having them write their name in lowercase letters? I'm like, that's not what we're here for. And it kind of fizzled out. And
and see, I
really hard.
I think there really needs to be a balance about that, because the pre-K programs, at least in Vermont, they have to work under the same VEL standards that the private centers do, whether they're participating as a qualified pre-K or not. So it really should be more, we're all working on these same goals, technically, at least here, we all have these same standards. How do we assess whether or not a child's really ready to make the transition? And then what do we need to do to make sure we're preparing them for that? So I think those conversations are really important. What I have noticed is the same thing you're mentioning about some are very engaged and some teachers are like not interested at all, is more how some of the children who have special needs and need services who aren't even in my district, their families are choosing to stay with me in my center rather than go to their school district, because we have that team meeting and they get a real clear sense from the pre-K teacher that they're not really interested in how do we incorporate this child with needs? How do we support them? What's it going to be like in their classroom experience? What is the safety level? They're just not interested. I just had one and the teacher just went, well, this is what we do during the day. This is our schedule. And that's all she said. And I went, and I know about this because of my own personal thing. So it's like, how do we bring that together? It's a culture change, right? It's an entire change of how private centers and schools interact. And I think there is, because teachers, like Andra said, teachers are like shifting back and forth, right? And a lot of them are going to the public schools because of pay and benefits. There's this sense of us and them. And I really wish that there was a way to address that and have it not be the case, because ultimately it's all about those kids and those families. And so how do we, this is part of what you were talking about for like long-term strategies. How do we make the early education system stronger?
And I think for us, what we learned is that facilitation, there should have been a facilitator. We were trying to run our own meetings and hold ourselves accountable, and administrative buy-in. If we had a principal sitting at our table, I don't think that teacher would have turned her back on us and texted through the entire meeting. So there needs to be accountability for what we're trying to do. And I think facilitation would have been key.
That's a great idea.
So I'm just going to add, I mean, this has been a long-standing issue, right? There has always been an equity issue between early educators and public school systems. They the reality is they speak a different language, right? But there are and I'll also say there's been national surveys done of elementary school principals, and the reality is that their understanding of child development is extremely limited, and they actually do not feel any confidence in understanding early childhood development and the needs of children and families during that time. So I think principals and public school educators need as much support and training on that as all of us. But I will mention in Boston, they made a conscious choice as they expanded their preschool program to actually modify the school-based curriculum in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade to align more closely with the outcomes desired in the early learning settings, right? So this sort of focus on social emotional development, school readiness, and not moving into academics before kids are really ready to move into them. They actually changed the elementary school curriculum to more reflect the early education setting. So there are models out there for ways of doing it. And that Boston model is considered, you know, one of the most innovative models in the country, right? So there are places that we can learn, you know, we just need to create the mechanism in which to do that, which is obviously a much more challenging question.
It's nice. Thank you for the information about a system that might be a bit different. I don't know. I would have to know more about how that works in Boston to know whether or not really the whole curriculum for those first, up to third grade needs to be addressed. But at least I can definitely see that, like, between pre-K and kindergarten, that would really be, that's when most of the transition happens. So it would be really nice to have some coordination there, and to know that since we do have all the same standards, what's confusing for people like me is then when I talk to public school pre-K teachers and say, well, what are the goals, or what are you looking at to see if a child's ready for kindergarten? And what I get told is we don't assess them to see if they're ready for kindergarten. Okay. That's hard for me to kind of grapple with, because where we are, we assess the kids as they go through each class or each group that they're working with. So if I have a 3-year-old who's really not ready to be in pre-K, I'll keep them in my 2-year-old class for a while, or maybe a few months or whatever, and move them. So to hear that, oh, well, we don't really have an assessment for kindergarten to know if they're ready for that setting. That's really hard, because it just doesn't make sense. So it would be nice to have more coordination. And it does come from that point of view of, what is a child ready for? Are we putting them in the setting that best meets their current developmental stage? So thanks for, I'll look that up, because that's very interesting to me.
Thanks, Amy and Ruth. Any other updates the group would like to share out before? Okay. Well, I have nothing more on my end, so we can maybe give you some 20 minutes of daylight back.
Did you not want to go through the key players conversation?
I don't have,
people?
yeah, I don't have the list in front of me. If you want to.
Okay.
Sorry, Sarah and I didn't get a chance to connect before this meeting on. I know there were some that she followed up with, but I haven't had I didn't get the latest update from her.
I included it in the agenda. So I just put the link to that in the chat.
Okay. I don't think we got the agenda before the meeting.
It was attached to the invite,
Okay.
which I sent back out. I'm sorry.
I have to, I think it's on my end. Some things don't always get to me, but it's also usually probably my fault. Okay. Then instead of trying to do that live, can we table that just, or maybe kind of ask people to go through it and kind of outside of this meeting time to follow up with some notes and circle back with Sarah and I if there are people on that list that they have a connection with, that we can kind of close the loop with them.
Yep.
Okay. So kind of put that charge out to the group as we kind of want to round out our recruitment. So we ensure that we have kind of a comprehensive group here as we try to move this work forward.
Yeah, and I think just in conjunction with the plan for the next advocacy meeting to have like sort of a 101 piece, that might be an easy way to pull in folks that you feel like ought to be at this involved with the advocacy work group. So even if they're not on this list of the key players that's in the agenda, anyone else you think that might be helpful to be part of that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the hope is this is ever expanding and growing. Yeah, beyond. So then just kind of to to close out, I did put, there's a link to do an easy advocacy at the federal level, just kind of to test your advocacy muscles through the First 5 Years Fund. We will be doing a kind of advocacy 101 training in 2 weeks, hopefully. So more information to come on that. If you do have, you know, Deli, I like the storytelling, we'll be sure to kind of emphasize that. If there's other questions or areas you want clarity on around advocacy, please send that to Sarah and myself, and we'll be sure to kind of forward that along to Matt. Any other housekeeping to-dos going forward? Okay. So, all right, with that, I will close this out and give you back 15 minutes. Thank you all.